Well, good evening. We are live on the Facebook, and I know Bob and Mary Margaret said they were going to watch on the Facebook. So Mary Margaret, of course, will be requested, so she's not ready to get out, but she's ready to watch.
Hi, Mary Margaret.
My wife says.
Hi, Mom.
So. And anyone else who might be watching.
Yes.
So we were going to do this last week, but had a weather cancellation before the 70 degrees on Sunday, before the blizzard this weekend. It's just, I just don't even know what we're doing around here. Anyway, well, the secret's out of the bag. My very favorite scripture is Habakkuk, or as the British say, Habakkuk, or in Hebrew, Habakkuk. It's actually a spit letter at the beginning. It's that shade. We don't have a letter in English, but that's what that letter is there. So it's Habakkuk. It is. I know it's funny because I always kept this one in my pocket, because anytime you go someplace, like Dr. Wallace, could you lead a devotional? Could you say a few words for us? I always had this one in my pocket, and the title of it was "The Best Book in the Bible You're Not Reading," because no one ever reads Habakkuk, and I also knew if I did a study on Habakkuk, nobody else would have done one recently. There's no chance that, we just came out of a study on Habakkuk. No one ever says that, So I was always ready with this book. This was great. But I don't know what has drawn. I do know what has drawn this to me. It's just such an unusual prophetic book, in that it is. Well, we'll just look at it and I'll show you what I mean. We don't know anything about the person Habakkuk. There is an apocryphal story that this is in the additions to Daniel in the Apocrypha, so if you grew up Catholic, you might know these stories. There's an apocryphal story that said that this prophet took Daniel food in exile. I don't know how much history to give to that story, just because the prophet would have been far older than Daniel. If anybody, Daniel should have taken the prophet food in exile. This is in no way fair. On this one, to have our senior adults serving the teenagers. I just don't think that's nice at this point in time. So I don't know what to give that one. The book is unusual because this is not preaching of Habakkuk. There's no sermons of Habakkuk in this book. This book is entirely an individual struggling with God. That's all this book is. This book is a man who is concerned about what he sees as God not acting in the world appropriately. That there's some serious questions about God's justice. Well, he starts with serious questions about God's timing. And then when God answers the issues of timing, then he's got some issues about exactly what God's going to do about this. And so it is, the beginning of the book is actually a dialogue. Habakkuk prays, God answers. Habakkuk prays, God answers. So it's really kind of an unusual, it's just an unusual book all the way around.
Job part 2.
What's that?
Job.
It is a little, and there is a lot of Job quality to it, really, because it's the same kind of issue. It's on some levels, it's why do bad things happen, or why less why do bad things happen. Why do bad people do well is really what Habakkuk's problem is. Why are you not acting on this? And he didn't like the answer any better when it came, but. What's that? Spoiler alert. Yeah. Well, we'll see when you see how God responds, you'll understand Habakkuk. The Babylonians at the time of the writing of this are the New World Power. The Assyrians have passed. So since the Kingdom of Israel fell in 590, well, the first deportation was 598, 597. We date this book to right before then. Right, this sometime when Habakkuk is wrestling with why God hasn't answered these prayers. So sometime at the end of 7th century, beginning of 6th century BC is what we're looking at. That's the setting of the book. So basic structure: the opening dialogue between Habakkuk and God. Then we have 5 woe sayings where Habakkuk says woe unto. We'll talk about those a little bit. And then we have the final psalm. Chapter 3 of the book of Habakkuk is a psalm, which is probably another reason that I like this book. But literally, in response to God's hard word, Habakkuk decided to write a song about it with musical instructions, hymn tune, hymn style, everything that you would expect. It's a full-on psalm. It's not just like a psalm. It's a psalm that has been put right there at the end of the book. sometimes I guess only music can speak the feelings that come from
Well,
deep within, and
That begs the question, was it tacked on to the later date? Or do you
Probably.
think it's-
probably. But I mean, I don't know what later date. I mean, it's stylistically it's different. Does that mean it comes from a different time? Maybe? Yeah, okay. I mean, we have so many questions on that. I mean, this book is redacted together, absolutely. In what order and at what time, that's the questions we don't have, so, ever. So, all right, well, let's open up here. This is Habakkuk's opening prayer to God. O Lord, how long shall I cry for help? Remember how long. Anytime you get how long, rhetorical feature, lament. So he's opening with a lament here, God. How long? How long will I cry for help and you not listen, or cry violence and you not save? Why do you make me see wrongdoing and look at trouble? Destruction and violence are before me. Strife and contention arise. The law, Torah, becomes slack. Justice never prevails. The wicked surround the righteous. Therefore, judgment comes forth perverted. So he's looking at the kingdom of Judah. He's looking at the world around him. And he asks God, how long are you going to be mocked like this? How long are you going to go on and let wicked people succeed? How long are you going to let your Torah be perverted? How long are you not going to do something, God? Which is, quite frankly, a fair question. I mean, this is a prayer that many of us, I think, in the course of our lives have asked the question, God, how long do we have to put up with this, whatever this might be? How long do we have to see wrongdoing and see justice never prevail? Well, the advantage Habakkuk has over us, God answers. But oh man, God, I mean, this is one of those times I say, the Bible doesn't tell you not to question God. The Bible tells you to be ready for the answer when you do, because boy, does God answer. God opens with, look at the nations and see, be astonished, be astounded, for a work is being done in your days that you would not believe if you were told. This is not a good opening for Habakkuk, I wouldn't think. Right? If God opens with, you're probably going to want to sit down, because news is coming. But here's the news. So be astounded, have a seat. Here's the news. I am rousing the Chaldeans, or the Babylonians. I'm rousing the Chaldeans, that fierce and impetuous nation who march through the breadth of land to seize dwellings not their own. Dread and fearsome are they, their justice and dignity proceed from themselves. Their horses are swifter than leopards, more menacing than wolves at dusk. Their horses charge, their horsemen come from far away. They fly like an eagle swift to devour. They all come for violence, with faces pressing forward. They gather captives like sand. At kings they scoff. Of rulers they make sport. They laugh at every fortress, heap up earth to take it. Then they sweep by like the wind. They transgress and become guilty. Their might is their God. So God says, no, I understand the problem. Absolutely. I'm taking care of the issue. Habakkuk says, God, why aren't you doing something about the unrighteousness in Judah? God says, no, I'm gonna. I'm bringing the Babylonians to take care of that. You might know the Babylonians, polytheistic, militaristic, fierce army Babylonians. I'm going to judge Judah with the Babylonians, so you should be satisfied. How about that? I have heard you. Babylonians are coming. This is terrible news, right? This is not at all what Habakkuk wants. So Habakkuk then acts as though he's dialed the wrong number. Are you not from old, O Yahweh, my God, my Holy God? I'm sorry, I was trying to reach Yahweh. I seem to have gotten the wrong deity, because this doesn't make any sense, right? You shall not die. Lord, you've marked them for judgment. O rock, you've established them for punishment. Your eyes are too pure to behold evil. You can't look on wrongdoing. Why do you look on the treacherous and are silent when the wicked swallow those more righteous than they? So I love this answer. It's like, okay, yeah, we're bad, but they're terrible. How is this fair? This isn't fair. I want to know why you're not bringing judgment. You tell me you're using them for judgment. I have a follow-up question. How is that possibly fair? You've made people like the fish of the sea, he says, like the crawling things that have no ruler. The enemy brings all of them up with a hook. He drags them out with his net. He gathers them in his saying. He rejoices and exults. Therefore, he sacrifices to his net, makes offerings to his saying, for by them his portion is lavish and his food is rich. Is he then to keep on emptying his net without destroying nations without mercy? This is a great question he comes back with. You have appointed a people that is exceptionally good at killing other people. So much so that they worship their might and their military prowess. They think that's the greatest thing. They sacrifice gods to their military prowess. And you're using these people, they worship their position in the world, and how is this fair? This isn't fair. I love that Habakkuk loves this answer. You know, ever have one of those moments when you just know you've got the answer? Like you've got the person. You're arguing with someone and you've got him. Well, Habakkuk is absolutely convinced he's got God here, right? Because, I mean, your eyes are too pure to look on wrongdoing, right? You're righteous. This is unrighteous. Therefore, this must be a mistake, obviously. And so Habakkuk's response is, I will stand at my watchpost, station myself on the rampart, and keep watch to see what he will say to me and what he will answer concerning my complaint. I got it. I can't wait to hear what God has to say to this, because I know I'm right. It's not right. It's not. How can I, being a mortal, see this as unjust, and God not see it's unjust? Obviously, it's unjust. So I've got it. Perfect. Nothing God can respond. Right. So God responds. I love God's response. God's response is the most unsatisfying response ever. Just so you know, just warning. Okay. It's the most unsatisfying response we ever got as children from our parents. That's, yes. You already know what it is, right?
What do you don't understand about no?
Close. Very close.
Because I said.
There it is.
Oh,
There it is, yes.
that's worse.
It is.
Exactly.
Because I said so, right? This is, the Lord answered me and said, write this down. Write the vision, make it plain on tablets so a runner may read it. There is still a vision for the appointed time. It speaks at the end. It doesn't lie. If it seems to tarry, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. Look at the proud. Their spirit is not right in them, but the righteous live by their faith. That's the answer right there. Moreover, wealth is treacherous. Arrogant don't endure. They open their throats wide as Sheol. Like death, they never have enough. They gather all the nations for themselves and collect people as their own. So in other words, yes, I understand the Babylonians are bad. And yes, there will come a reckoning for the Babylonians. But this isn't about the Babylonians. This is about Judah right now. And Judah and Babylonians are a means by which Judah is being judged for the decisions that Judah has made. Eventually, Babylon gets judged for the decisions Babylon has made, but we're not talking about that right now. Right now, what we're worried about is the unrighteousness that's going on in Judah, the reckoning that is coming on there. It'll all make sense. Until then, the righteous live by faith. You're just going to have to trust me. The righteous person is the one that trusts me, which is terribly unsatisfying. Right? It'll make sense eventually, because I said so. Hang in there. Write it down so you don't forget. If it tarries, wait for it.
That's what God always says.
Well, you probably should have.
Righteous will live by faith.
That's true.
You have to trust.
You're going to have to hang in there. I'm sorry. I can't help you. Yeah.
Is the connotation of live in that statement, the righteous will live by faith, is that like the righteous will survive this oncoming onslaught by faith, or like
No,
they will
that's
persist, like,
a daily walk issue.
gotcha.
A walking issue by faith. That's the way you go. I'm trying to decide whether or not I should tell you the way Paul uses this verse. If it's really that interesting. It's kind of interesting. Because Paul uses this verse a couple of times, but it's a great example of the way rabbinical arguments care nothing about the original context, and they use them to make their point, to back them up. And this is one of those verses that he does that with, and it's a great way, and it completely depends on the Greek order of the words, not the Hebrew order of the words. Because the Greek orders of the words is, the righteous by faith will live, which doesn't seem to make any difference in English. You know, the righteous by faith will live, you sound a little like Yoda, but it doesn't really change the meaning. Paul makes an argument in Galatians and in Romans when he is arguing that the ones who are justified by faith, as opposed to the ones who are justified by works, are the ones that have achieved favor with God. And he backs that up with the Greek word order by saying, see, right there in Habakkuk it says, the ones righteous by faith will live. It's a brilliant move, really. You got to give him points for the argument. And anyone who was arguing with him would never have thought to say, that's not what it means in the original context. They all would have said, ooh, that was a good one. He's got us on that one. All right, we're going to have to go someplace else. But yeah, this is just one of those places where this verse is incredibly important in Pauline theology, but what Paul is doing is something different than what Habakkuk is doing. And I just wanted, that's an aside. That doesn't have to do with Habakkuk, but I thought it's helpful because this verse comes up a lot. The just shall live by faith, the righteous shall live by faith. Anything there that you want to unpack? So that can give people heartburn, and I don't know if we need to take some time to deal with your heartburn, or we're okay with that? Nope. You're all right with rabbis using scripture different than us? Yeah, students never are, but you guys are. That's fine. Yeah. Paul would never have passed a modern hermeneutics class, but that's okay because modern hermeneutic professors couldn't have given the message that Paul gave in his time. I mean, interpretation is so often culturally dependent. That's what it does. All right. So how do you respond when you're Habakkuk? What do you do here? Well, we have our 5 woe sayings. And we're saying, woe to those who seek to acquire possessions and control others, because they'll be punished by God. The people who are plundering will become plundered. It's a better pun in Hebrew. God's action will go ahead and not be deterred by any supposed gods out there. God is not going to lose to the gods of Babylon. This is not a battle between Yahweh and Marduk. This is something that God is doing. This is something that I think you see Habakkuk doing kind of preemptively, because in the ancient world, when 2 nations go to war, their 2 gods go to war. And whoever has the bigger god, they're obviously the more powerful god is the one who's going to win every time. And so one of the difficulties Judah had in the exile was trying to explain why Yahweh didn't lose to Marduk. Because Marduk is the god of Babylon, Yahweh is the god of Israel. And so most of the time, that's when you see those first seeds of monotheism really that have been planted already really blossom, because what they end up saying is, no, Marduk didn't do this to us, Yahweh did this to us. In fact, there is no Marduk. That's the next step in that argument, as they did that in the exile. This, I think, is preemptive of that. God's not losing to other gods. That's not why this is happening. This is happening because God's action may take a while, but it's going to, don't be deceived by God's patience in this. Basically, for Habakkuk, power and possession seem to be his main concerns. The way people are using, and this is a direct shot at Babylon. People using power and possessions to feed power and possessions, which is all Babylon's concerned about, expanding empire, invading. I mean, this is one of those times when Egypt was actually conquered on their home in Egypt. That rarely ever happened. I think it happened like 3 times in 2,000 years. Babylon's one of them. They actually expanded down into Egypt, but they expanded so fast that they sort of collapsed in on themselves when the Persians came along. So they were all about power and possessions. But Habakkuk still doesn't know how he's going to deal with it. He's still wrestling with this answer. God has now come back to him and say, because I said so, you're just going to have to trust me. What do? Right? You do like we did as teenagers and storm off to your room and slam the door. I never asked to be a prophet. How do you respond to this kind of, this is a tough word. As Cindy stuck her tongue out at God. It's a tough word, right? He always said that. Yeah, what he always says. Habakkuk decides to deal with it by writing a song.
Okay, wait.
Go ahead.
You said there were 5.
I just gave you 4.
Yes, you did.
I know,
I
this
can
is
count.
2. I know, this is,
Well done.
this is 2. Power.
Geez, you're good for that.
Yeah, that's it. I collapsed one.
Wait, where are the woes? It's like you're in verse 3.
I skipped chapter 2. I'm in chapter
He
3.
summarized.
I summarized the woes.
One page.
Oh.
I gave you a 1 sheet on the woes.
Oh, I thought you were going to show us the woes. Okay.
Do you really want to see the woes?
Yeah.
No.
And then he breaks into song.
He breaks into song. Yeah.
Yeah.
Suddenly, it's Habakkuk the musical. That's where we are now. It is actually a style of song called a shigion. This is a shigionot, which is the plural of shigion. The other example of a shigion is in Psalm, I always forget, Psalm 8 or Psalm 7. Psalm 7 or 8, I believe, is also a shigion. It's singular. It's a shigion. This is a shigionot. No idea what that means. As I told you in the Psalm study, musical terms are tricky things because what you really need to understand context, what you really need to understand vocabulary is context, and musical terms always occur in the same context. It's always a song. So you don't know what Selah means. I mean, no one really knows what Selah means. I can give you some possibilities based on etymology, but I don't really know what they're doing with it. A shigion, I don't know what a shigion is. It does seem to have connections to a root word that means wild or reeling, and that might fit the topic. And yeah, it could be a very metal song that he's putting together here. I don't know, but yeah, it's tough. The best parable I always give for trying to understand musical terms was my mentor, actually the professor after whom Daniel is named. Wonderful archaeologist, wonderful Old Testament scholar, no musical ability whatsoever. Couldn't carry a tune in a bucket. I mean, really none. And Dan would be the first one to tell you that.
Or follow a hymn.
He can't, yes, which is the illustration I'm giving.
Sorry.
He was talking about musical terms and how obscure they are to those who aren't musical. And Dan, to make his point, I think you were in the class with me when he did this, he said, for example, you're singing in church. What the heck does fine mean? I have no idea what fine means. All I know is I see fine, and it's not fine because I don't know where everybody goes. Everybody leaves, and I'm completely lost. Well, of course, it's not fine. It's fine. It's Italian. And you usually DS al fine, and you go to the sign, and then you come back and sing to the end. But Dan had no way of knowing that, as Dan had no musical understanding whatsoever, and so he couldn't translate this word that he knew what fine, he'd seen the word, shigion. I can do that, but I have no idea what the context is. So it's just an unfortunate reality that some of these musical terms just remain a mystery to us. I mean, we think some of them mean to the music director, we think some of them wild and reeling, for me, I like to translate them. I like to keep the musical terms in there, even though I don't know them, but just as a reminder that this was musical, just as a connection to it being a song. I just think that's a special thing. I don't know, I like that part of it. So this is a shigion, shigionot. I did have a student once suggesting that Habakkuk was getting shiggy with it. I thought you would like that term. But anyway. Any questions on our song here? Yeah, go ahead.
You said Sila Shiva. Timan, is this another one of those, God came from Timan?
Yeah.
This is not like a musical thing. What
It's
is
not a musical thing. That's actually a region. Let's look at these verses. O Yahweh, O Lord, I have heard of your renown. I stand in awe, O Yahweh, of your work. In our time, revive it. In our time, make it known. In wrath, may you remember mercy. God came from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran. Selah. His glory covered the heavens, and the earth was full of praise. Selah, by the way, some suggest means to pause. Some suggest it means to stand up or to raise hands up. Some think it means to bow down, which tells you how much agreement there is on what this word means. Anyway, I've seen this verse used a lot of different ways. This verse is not. This verse is an imploring statement. This is a God. I've heard of the things you have done in the past. I remember your faithfulness to our ancestors. It'd be nice if you could remember that now, in this time when I'm having a crisis of faith. If you could be as faithful in the now as you have been in the past, that would be great. Teman and Mount Paran are two sites in Edom. So Edom, for those you remember, is a country about the same size as Judah. It is located to the southeast of Judah. It is in modern-day Jordan. Some of you know Petra, the site Petra in Jordan, the divine treasury. It's an Idumean site. Idumean is the New Testament word for Edomite. It's the same thing. So Herod the Great was an Idumean. He was an Edomite. They thought of themselves as sort of brothers. They saw themselves as descendants of Esau. So there was a tightness between Edom and Israel. Usually that was brought up anytime one was betraying the other one. We're brothers. It's usually the way it goes. This, I think, is a reference to wilderness wandering. So when this is the area, they actually camped at Mount Paran for a little while in the wilderness. And so I think that is what is being
They're
referred
not
to
saying
here.
God literally came from.
I don't think
they're
no.
saying We obtained the God.
I don't think we received God here. No, I think this is an example of a place God came from while we were there. Like God was portable, you recall, and we could move him from Sinai to Teman. It's also, the word Teman can mean to the right, and so it's sometimes used sort of metaphorically as east. So I suppose God came from the east could work, but that's not, I've never seen anyone translate it, particularly with Mount Paran in the next verse. That seems to be referring to Edomites. Speaking of Job, you mentioned Job earlier. One of Job's friends, Eliphaz, was a Temanite. He was from Teman. So a lot of connections to Edom and Job, actually. But anyway, we're looking at a time when God was with Israel. I think this is a wilderness reference. This is one of those times when music is poetic. It's hard to know exactly what we're talking about, right? I mean, sometimes art and poetry, metaphor you can lose it, and exactly what specific thing we're going for is hard. I think this is wilderness wandering, and I say that because as we go on, we'll see a little more. The brightness was like the sun, rays came forth from his hand. That is often a battle image. Deuteronomy 33 uses rays and arrows in parallel of God, where his power lay hidden. Before him went pestilence, plague followed close behind. He stopped, and so I see that as conquest, I think. If not conquest, Egypt. So Egypt, possibly conquest, possibly the battle that they fought in the wilderness. I mean, there's a lot of options here. He stopped and shook the earth. He looked and made the nations tremble. Eternal mountains were shattered. His ancient pathways, his everlasting hills sank low. The tents of Cushan under affliction. The tent curtains in the land of Midian trembled. Cushan would be Ethiopia, south of Egypt. Sometimes used as in parallel with Midian. This only happens a couple times though, so I don't know if we're supposed to think of these as the same place or if this is two other examples. We're interpreting poetry, right? So a lot of room here. Was your wrath against the rivers, O Lord, or your anger against the river? Your anger against the rivers, or your rage against the sea when you drove your horses, your chariots to victory? Conquest, creation, Egypt. I get a lot of celebration of God's power. That's what I'm getting. I can't give you much more specific than that. God's big, God's powerful, God has always been big, God has always been powerful, God's done some pretty big and powerful things. And he's taking a moment to remember God's bigness and God's powerfulness as we go through. So, we're building. I promise we're building. So you brandish your naked bow, sated were arrows at your command, Selah. You split the earth with rivers. When mountains saw you and writhed, torrent of water swept by, the deep gave forth its voice, the sun raised high its hands. So I'm thinking creation at this point, and then the moon stood still in its exalted place, and the light of your arrows speeding by, the gleam of your flashing spear. Now we're back to military imagery again. So I'm not sure. In fury you trod the earth, in anger you trampled nations. You came forth to save your people, to save your anointed Messiah. You crushed the head of the wicked house, laying it bare from foundation to roof, Selah. You pierced with his own arrows the head of his warriors, who came like a whirlwind, a tornado, to scatter us, gloating as if ready to devour the poor who were in hiding. You trampled the sea with your horses, churning the mighty water. So I think what we're seeing here, celebration of all the ways in which God has been there for this people in the past. The number of nations that were conquered in creation, in conquest imagery, a lot of conquest imagery, which is blended with creation imagery all the way through, but king and conqueror are image and creator are images that are often woven together. So go ahead.
And wicked house, is this allegorical or the specific?
Great question. I mean, are we talking about specific examples, or are we simply talking about God's faithfulness over? I think what we see are 6 or 15 verses of Habakkuk remembering God's place in the cosmos and his relationship with Judah, and the way in which God has been faithful throughout history to Judah, and using incredibly poetic, beautiful language to do it, but to do it in a way that is that never forgets what God is to Israel and who God has been to Israel, and the way in which God has been faithful to God's promises. Right? These peoples, they were destroyed, the ones who tried to oppose God. So again, with Babylon as the underlying story here, right? I mean, we're worried that Babylon's going to get away with it. The wicked are going to succeed. God's never let people get away with it. There's always been a reckoning for people who were prideful and trusted in their possessions and power. So we're building up to the big moment here. All right, so this is the past. We're building up to verse 6. And for some reason, I didn't get verse 16 on here. I don't know why. But he says in verse 16, when I heard, I ached in my bones. In other words, when God gave me an answer, it literally made me sick. I could not believe that this was true. He said, I will wait for the day of calamity to come upon those who are going to punish us. I will wait for you to be faithful to the promise you gave. When you gave me this news, it really upset me. That's basically what he says. Then comes verses 17 and 18. And this is one of those moments that these are two verses that are worth underlining, highlighting, circling, starring, scoring in any way you possibly can, committing to memory. Habakkuk chapter 3, verses 17 and 18, some of the most beautiful verses in all of Scripture. Here they are. It's my favorite, right here, I promise. Though the fig tree does not blossom, no fruit is on the vines, though the produce of olive fails, and the fields yield no food, though the flock is cut off from the fold, and there's no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord, I will exult in the God of my salvation. So he's just spent 15 verses talking about here are all the ways God has been faithful in the past. Here are all the ways God has answered prayer. Here are all the ways that God has actually been everything God promised in the past. When God told me what God was going to do, it made me sick. But though the fig tree doesn't blossom and the vineyard, even if I didn't have 15 verses of evidence, even if I didn't have any evidence that God has answered, if there's no fruit for the effort that I am yielding, I'm sowing and planting here and nothing comes about, I'm still happy. I'm still going to rejoice in the God of my salvation. So, in the absence of evidence that God is going to answer, Habakkuk says, he goes beyond trusting. I'm not just going to trust in God, I'm glad for the chance to believe at this point. This is a faith I look up to. This is a faith that you go, really? I mean, with no evidence, with no benefit, with no proof that God is actually there or answered or listened in any way, Habakkuk goes, yeah, I'm just glad for the chance to be here. I'm just glad for the chance to work for God while I can, even in the midst of God. So his question of the righteous will live by faith, Habakkuk goes, not just faith, I got joy. I'm glad about it. I'm in it with you, God. Even if you make no sense, even if there's no evidence, I'm in. That's why I love this passage. These two verses are just the greatest. They're just the greatest thing ever. See a person wrestling with this kind of existential crisis in their life and to come back and after praying about it and working through it and taking a moment to sing a song about all the ways God's been faithful in the past, you know what? Even if I don't see the evidence now, that's enough for me to be glad to begin. I'm in. So, all right, I got excited and got wound up and haven't asked for questions in a while, so I do that. But what thoughts or issues or struggles do you have here?
So then the Babylonians show up.
So, yes, and they do. And they destroy it and they're taken off to exile.
Actually, serious question.
Sure.
This poem referenced a phrase that I've seen pop up again and again, especially with creation images, but
Sure.
I'm not sure I understand conceptually what it meant to them.
Okay.
When they reference the deep,
Yes.
Is-
to home.
to what?
To home. I'm sorry, it's a Hebrew word. It's to
Oh,
home.
yeah.
Yeah.
What is that conceptually to them? Is that more than just the ocean or what?
No, it is the ocean, but it's the ocean itself represents primordial chaos. The Hebrew word tihom is etymologically connected to the Akkadian word Tiamat, which was the Babylonian goddess of the deep. She was the saltwater chaos dragon that Marduk split in half, dividing the waters above from the waters below. And so that's the Babylonian story. So the Bible comes along and says God split the home into the Mayim above and the Mayim below. So there are echoes in Genesis 1 of that creation story, and that. So the deep is always, so anytime I see the deep, it's always creation. It's always a chaos image.
Does that fit into like a cosmological vision that they had
Yeah, without question.
pre like Ptolemaic influence?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is, it is always a negative image that God is sovereign over. That's the thing. The deep is terrifying and scary and will kill you. For some reason, the Phoenicians are the only people in the entire ancient Near East that liked it. Everybody else, hey, water will kill you. The ocean will kill you. If you go out on it, you're not coming back. And the Phoenicians go, we got it. So the Phoenicians liked the ocean. Nobody else liked the ocean. Everyone else was convinced it would kill them. So when God is commanding the deep, that is a statement of sovereignty. I mean, creation is a statement of kingship in a way that we don't get. I mean, that is a royal metaphor. It's a power metaphor. So absolutely, the deep, anytime you see the deep mentioned, sometimes mentioned as Leviathan, sometimes mentioned as Rahab, sometimes mentioned just as the deep, but anytime you see those images, that is a statement of primordial chaos that God is sovereign over. So again, remembering God's position in the cosmos and the universe here, including his ability to command creation, I can probably shut up and trust him to answer even if I don't see any actual benefit. Yeah. Which is, again, this is a faith I look up to. Okay. Now, I know some of you may have done some work on stages of faith in the past. There are a lot of really interesting stages of faith studies that are done. There is a very handy shorthand that, because it's a handy shorthand, it's a gross oversimplification. But it's from Bernard of Clairvaux. in his essay on the love of God, 13th century monk. He was a Benedictine, and he had his issues. But his work on love is fascinating, and it provides a really handy metaphor. He said there were basically 4 stages of love, 3 of which are relevant for us on the earth. The last we get when we finally are known fully. The first is when we love self for self. This is the stage of the infant, right? This is the stage who doesn't care if you're sleeping, they're hungry. They don't care if you have put on a clean shirt, they need to throw up. I'm just using that as a random example, not anything specific. They don't care if you just put your suit in the dry cleaners, they will put a dirty footprint on your suit and you will preach from it in Sunday morning. Remember that time? I had them brand, I just cleaned the suit and dusty Texas running around boys, I pick them up and there's a big old footprint right on my suit the rest of the day. Anyway, and you know what? You have to. When you're a child, that's the way you survive. It's the way you communicate. You have to do this. Some people never grow out of this. Just a cursory glance at Instagram, for example, will tell you. Some people never grow out of this. Some people come to understand loving God for self. In other words, I want to go to heaven. I don't want to go to hell. I want riches while I'm on earth. I want my enemies to suffer. Whatever it is, you're confessing a belief in God, but only because you get stuff. You learn to love parents for what they feed me. So I love it. The third step for Clairvaux is loving God for the sake of God, not for any concern for you whatsoever. This is also known as disinterested piety, to be religious when there's nothing in it for you. In fact, to be religious when it actually might cost you something to be religious, when it might hurt you to be religious. Rarely do we get to this point. I mean, there are those special folks, maybe, that get to this point, but it's rare. Habakkuk apparently one of those special folks. One of those people who is able to say, even though it hurts me, even though it pushes me, even though it challenges me, I'm in this, God, whatever you need me to do. I mean, Habakkuk is saying this at a time, and this is something I think that we miss. Habakkuk is saying this at a time when God can't fix it in the afterlife. See, we tend to have a belief in afterlife where we can just fix those injustices that come around, right? I mean, things are bad here, but eventually it'll be okay, right? In the sweet by and by, it'll all be all right. Habakkuk is writing at a time when he doesn't have a belief in afterlife. So it's hard for us, I think, to hear the level of faith he is showing when he says this. I mean, this is the equivalent of, I know for absolute certain that when I die, I'm going to hell for all eternity. No hope, do not pass go, do not collect $200, FedEx straight to hell. Habakkuk is saying, well, then I'll be glad for the chance to serve God while I got it. I mean, that is the level of faith of God. There's no reward, there's no hope. He's in, though, for God, for the sake of God. I suppose on our best day we might dip up into this, right? But you see this faith a lot in the Old Testament. You see this faith in what's a good example? Abraham. When Abraham was asked to offer Isaac, we sometimes think of that just as an offering of son, but it's not just an offering of son, because God has told Abraham that all of the promises of the covenant will come through Isaac. And so when he is asked to offer Isaac, he is being asked to give up all of the promises that come. Are you willing to give up? Are you just a jumping dolphin at SeaWorld? Are you just following me because I give you good things? I mean, or are you actually in this? And it shows, no, I'm in it for I'm in it for you. Does it make sense? Not happy about it, but I'll do it. And God says, now I know that you will not withhold your son, your only son from me. Now I know that you love me on this level, right? Not just for the cookies. You're actually in it at this point. So Abraham, Jeremiah. It's funny, Jeremiah. We'll talk about Jeremiah soon, but one of my favorite parts of Jeremiah is this is the level of faith that is at work in Jeremiah's life. This is the level of faith that's not even at work in Israel's life. Because Jeremiah is telling Israel, if you would just do what God says, you would be blessed. But you're not doing what God says. And yet Jeremiah does everything God says and gets beaten and dropped in a well and exiled from town and hated by his family and hated by the king. And so Jeremiah is willing to show obedience to God even when it costs God, but he is just completely at a loss with people of Judah for not doing what God asked when God would bless them if he did what they asked. They're not even this aware, Jeremiah says. You haven't gotten this point yet. You're still here. So Habakkuk is operating here on this level. He is loving God for the sake of God. It's funny because I know if any of my former students are watching this, they know this really well. I talk about this when we do Habakkuk. I talk about this when we do Jeremiah. I talk about this when we do Job. I talk about this whenever I mention Jesus, who obviously wasn't in it for what Jesus got out of it, right? I mean, this is a loving God for God. This interested piety for me is it's top shelf faith right there. That's the highest level of faith you can get. Clairvaux did say that, Bernardo Clairvaux did say that eventually, once we have become, and once we are in the presence of the Almighty, we learn what it is to see ourselves for the sake of who God is. So it flips this eventually, but he says that can't happen here. I mean, that only happens in the presence of the divine. This is the highest you can get on earth. So, which is pretty high, I think. We're aiming pretty high here. So,
When did you say he was?
13th century.
13?
13th century. So yeah, I love Habakkuk for these verses, 17 and 18. A person who has asked God an honest question, whom God has responded in a way that Habakkuk was not happy about. And when faced with that crisis of faith, took some time, remembered who God was, and then came to the end of the day and said, yeah, you know what, I'm in, no matter what happens. Yeah.
So going back to the very beginning, is it fair to say that we, from a biographical point of view,
Yeah.
we know less about who this guy was than anybody else?
That's probably right.
I think our only sources for him are this and like Bell and the Dragon.
Yeah, Bell and the Dragon is the only place where we have any biographical, and that's so late
That's-
and
yeah.
so anachronistic that I just don't
Sensitive.
think that there's any value biographically to it. Yeah, we don't know anything about this guy, except that he was writing right before the Babylonians show up,
Hmm.
because it doesn't make much sense if he's writing later. Yeah,
I mean, it almost sounds like it's an apologetic for them having lost the Babylonians.
Maybe.
Like the whole thing is set up as,
yeah,
why are you about to let this happen?
yeah.
And he's saying, well, this
So you
is
see
punish
it
you,
sort of
not.
as answering that question? Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe. I will say this was a prominent text at the Qumran settlement, the Dead Sea Scrolls. They found a copy of Habakkuk. What is interesting to me is the copy of Habakkuk at Qumran doesn't have chapter 3. It ends after the woe statements. That God will bring judgment on power, God will bring judgment on the prosperous who are using their money for self, and that's the end of the story. So they don't have the song at the end. So I think we gotta finish with a big musical number personally.
Redactional choices of.
Yeah, they make some interesting choices. Yeah, well,
Where did we get this that has the third
the
chapter?
third chapter?
Yeah, so you've got that in Dead Sea
And the Dead Sea
Scrolls,
Scrolls. Mhm.
and then we have this.
This represents Masoretic text, which the earliest extant copy we have of a Masoretic text, I believe, is the Aleppo Codex, which is about the 8th century AD. However, the text itself is so close to so many of those Hebrew passages at Qumran. The Jewish scribes were so good. I mean, the Jewish scribes were they were so professional. Christian scribes were terrible. The early Christian scribes were just horrendous, but the early Jewish scribes, they were great. And to have 1,000 years pass between the Aleppo Codex, between the Qumran text and the Aleppo Codex, and have the text be as close as they are is nothing short of remarkable. So I have no problems believing that this represents an earlier one. I should also say that the Septuagint has a Greek translation of chapter 3, and that would date about the same time as Qumran. So the earliest Hebrew copy we have is late, but the Greek copy we have is pretty early. They didn't have the angst about canon that we do on some. In fact, at Qumran there are 2 copies of Jeremiah. There's the Greek copy, there's the Hebrew copy, and there's the Greek copy, which is 1/8 shorter than the Hebrew copy. And when I say 1/8 shorter, I don't mean like it's missing the last chapter. I mean like as you go through it, there are bits of it that are just not in the book for some bizarre reason. And both, it seems, were canonical at Qumran. We would want to ask, well, which one do we need? They didn't. That didn't bother them. They're just Jeremiah.
Do you
So
see the Essenes breaking into
Do I see the S? Yeah, the Essenes are usually the people that are attributed to being at Qumran. And yeah, they didn't strike me as a musical people.
Yeah.
They made some interesting psalm choices, interestingly. The psalm scroll at Qumran is very different. I should say this. The first three books, Psalms 1 to 89, are exactly the same at Qumran and in Hebrew. 90 to 150, completely different. Some are missing, some are added. 2 Samuel 24 is actually a psalm at Qumran. So, I mean, their Psalter was, what that tells us about canon, I don't know, but obviously it's complicated. That's all I can tell you about that. But yeah, they're missing chapter 3 in Habakkuk, which is a shame, because this is the best verses in the whole Bible right here. I just thought. Everything's there. I mean, you got gospel, it says Jesus here. This is all there. It's great stuff. Love Habakkuk.
Jesus cursed the fig tree when it did.
But he did. That's true. Jesus was a little more impatient about the fig tree than Habakkuk
He
seems.
was using a different metaphor.
He's just, I'm cool with there's nothing there. And Jesus was, you know what?
Absolutely not.
No. Cursing the fig tree. So you see why it's my favorite book? Is it your favorite book now too? Yeah. That's right. It's just such a good book. Go ahead, brother.
I'm always really interested in how we, in the past, looked at Habakkuk and the
Yeah.
other as books.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you look at Habakkuk as a person.
I do.
And Jeremiah as a
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
And the prophets as persons.
Yeah, probably because it's written in voice, right? I mean, this
Yeah.
is proclamation. This is song that he is singing and
Yeah.
things that he's speaking. So
I like your way.
so that's probably why you're exactly right. I mean, and I think you're right.
It's-
At some point in my life, I started hearing them speak instead
Yeah.
of just.
These
reading.
words in this
Yeah.
book,
You're right.
series of books of prophets.
That's a good observation.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm weird. That's what that means.
So the word salvation there,
Yes.
how would that have fallen on ancient Hebrew ears?
Joshua, that's the word. It's Hosea. It's Hosea. It's the deliverance. It's the word that is used to talk about Exodus. It's the word that's used to talk about freedom from exile. It's the word that's talked about to
This is like Marshall.
out of
political-
captivity.
It's because we like Westerners read that and we think
Oh, sure.
personal, individual
Right.
salvation.
Yeah, no. This was a national concern. This is a corporate identity always.
And this being a song would have been intended to be, like, this is the voice of a community. This
It
is not
is.
necessarily Habakkuk's voice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say both. It's the author's voice sung as community. I mean, the individual laments as psalms are individual laments in a corporate hymn book that everyone sings. So I mean, I think there's a place for that. I mean, one third of the psalms are individual laments, which is remarkable. So I mean, there was this. I understand why people do this. These theologians, you never trust theologians. Biblical scholars are better than theologians. Theologians had this liturgist in particular. They were up in arms about praise choruses that only had first-person pronouns. It's always I and me, and I mean that's very American. I get it, and I understand. Yes, that is too much of that is narcissistic. Too much of that does reflect our hyper-individualistic American culture. That is something to be concerned about. That said, a third of the Psalms are individual laments. I cry out to you, O Lord. And that when we sing them in community, suddenly I is different on some level. So I tended to push back a little on some of the theologians who refuse to sing those songs. Let's not get snotty about this. I think there's room in this story for moments of confession like that are sung corporately. So, theologians, it's crazy. There's a whole, it's like engineers and physicists, and I'm trying to think of some other ones, Sopranos and everybody else.
Mechanical engineers and electrical engineers.
There you go. Yeah, that's a good example. Theologians and biblical scholars. It was funny, one of my students who was a theology major came from class one day and said, I was sharing something like this, like Bernardo Clairvaux, because I'm a biblical guy who's read Bernardo Clairvaux. And they said, Dr. Wallace, we were talking, and a bunch of us think that you're an Old Testament theologian more than an Old Testament scholar. And I said, well, I'll take that as a compliment. I'm sure you meant it to be. All right. Well, that's what I have to say about that, about Habakkuk. We're going to continue toward exile now. I believe our next move is going to be Jeremiah, which is going to take more than one night. Jeremiah's not organized at all. I've heard so many scholars, well, it's organized thematically. I haven't found the theme yet, so it is just all over the place. In fact, the book of Jeremiah, at one point, it says that he gave a word to the king, and the king cut up the scroll and threw it in the fire. And Dan used to say, and apparently Baruch got it out of the fire and sewed it back together, and that's what we've got now. It's just, it's just all over the place. So we'll talk about that in such a way as to make some sense next time. But as we go, have a great week. I will see you on Sunday.
Thank you.
Well,
Looks like we're talking 20, 30 grand.
It's insurance. Yes.
Yes.
huh?
Yes.
You know?
So we haven't got
But the
final
really,
position.
it's
Very good.
wonderful stress. Yeah. Okay.
You know the joke about the German professor that someone called him a professor, I'm sorry, your office caught fire and one of your books is burned. He said, oh my gosh, he said, one of the books is my dissertation. He goes, yes. He goes, which one? He goes,
Well,
volume 17. He goes,
Sarah's
"Oh, the verb."
got him doing level
Verb.
2.
I was just gonna attack level 1. In fact, without having gotten
You
into
gonna go back and go home?
I'm wondering.
I will pack up and I'll be right back. Absolutely.
Would be concerned, but you do it, they do it,
Yeah.
it's on the fly. I mean, that's.
Yeah,
that's
that's, yeah.
That's
No,
really what's going on.
Yeah, it's.
Hey there.
See you later.
See you later.
Yeah.
What do we got here?
Don't worry about the permit.